Hello, I'm Jeremy, and today I'm going to be talking about a game by the name of Northern Pacific. This is designed by Tom Russell, published by Rio Grande Games. It's a reprinting of a game that was put out by Winsome Games, who's known for their lighter train games. A few years back, this is, I believe, a 2018 release, and it plays from 2 to 6 players in about 30 minutes or so if you play about 3 rounds. The box actually says 60 minutes, and I think I would go insane if I played a 60-minute game of this, but it should definitely not take that long, maybe if with the 6 players if they all have analysis paralysis. But it's really a quick game about shared incentives, where players are going to be playing investors who are going to be dropping cubes into cities along a potential train route, hoping that the train will stop in those cities so they'll get payouts. The game's going to be played in its typical rule set over 3 rounds, and the player who has got the most return on their investments over the course of those rounds is going to be the winner. I'll take a few minutes to show you how the game works. Obviously, you already know that I like the game. I included it on my top 10 list last year. But I will show you how the game plays, and then I'll come back and give you a few more thoughts about the game. So Northern Pacific's an investment game, and each player is going to be given at the start of the game some investment cubes, essentially 3 small investment cubes and 1 large investment cube. And thematically, what's going to be happening over the course of the game, which is going to be played over 3 rounds in the standard rules, is that the train is going to be, the Northern Pacific Railway line, is going to move from Minneapolis-St. Paul all the way to Seattle, and it'll be passing through cities on its westward expansion. The cities that it hits, if players have investment cubes in them, they'll get their investment cubes back plus a dividend, which is, cubes from the supply. Essentially just simulating that the town has been prosperous and their investment has paid off. So over the course of the game, there's going to be 1 expansion of the train each round from Minneapolis to Seattle. As soon as the train reaches Seattle, the round will end and players will tally up the cubes that they have in front of them. So at the start of the round, like I said, they'll have 4 cubes, 3 small, 1 big. On their turn, they can either place that cube into one of those cities, so maybe a player might choose to do that, or might choose to do that, just simply placing 1 cube at a time. Or the other option is that the player could extend the railway line. So all the players are going to be doing that jointly as a group, with the rules being that it has to essentially follow these lines. And on these lines, there are arrows. So you can see from Minneapolis-St. Paul, there are 4 lines which essentially make it go to one of these 4 cities. It won't ever be able to go backwards. A few of the cities do have double lines between them. For example, between Fargo here and Grand Forks, you could make it go one way, but it could not double back upon itself. It's only ever going to move closer to Seattle over the course of the round. It could, there's nothing preventing it from going, up here, then down here, then up here, but essentially it will be generally trending westward. So maybe the pink player, when it comes back around to them, they could just place another cube. Maybe they would do something like that. And then maybe the blue player would, place a cube. The red player might place a cube, hoping that, it'll reach Terry. And something that I should mention is that based on your number of player counts, so I'm simulating a 4-player game here, there's going to be a limit to how many cubes could be placed into a given city. So in a 4-player game, only 3 cubes could be in a given city. A player could have multiple cubes in the same city if they want, but the total number of cubes across all players would be 3 in a 4-player game. So now would be the green player's turn. And maybe they would want to do something like this and extend the train. So now essentially the train would be considered to be in Fargo, and it could only extend from Fargo into one of these 3 cities. And they might have done that because now, because it hasn't gone into Aberdeen, it could never get to Aberdeen. So these will be considered lost investments for these 2 players. The green player effectively cut them off because although there is a line here from Bismarck to Aberdeen, it points in that direction, so the train could never come back this way. So that would be the green player's turn. Then it would go back to the pink player, and maybe they would do something equally cutthroat and move the train up to Minot. So now, essentially, the train's gone to here, so it could only go here or here next. So these are all bad investments for those players. So that would be essentially how the game is going to play out. So now it would be the blue player's turn. they would probably choose to do something like that and cut it off. But just for the sake of argument, let's say that it was the red player's turn, and they would make the train come to Terry. So now these cubes, because they're in Terry, are going to pay off. So the way that they pay off are every player gets a cube that they place back, and then, depending on the size of the cube, you're going to get cubes from the supply. You'll get small cubes from the supply. So if you placed a big cube like this player and this player did, you would get 2 cubes back. If you place a small player like this, a small cube like this player did, you'll get 1 cube back. So essentially, this is how the game's going to play out. You're essentially going to be placing a cube or extending the railway until it reaches Seattle. Taking your cubes back as the train reaches cities where they're present. There's nothing preventing you from speculating far in advance and placing all the way out here, except for the fact that you're going to start the round with only 4 cubes, so you want to have them pay off early on, so you'll be able to do your later investments. In any case, once the train, however it does reach Seattle, reaches it, the round will end immediately. So let's say a player places that last train. At that point, players will count up the cubes that are in front of them. Each cube's just 1 point, whether it's a big or a small cube. So the pink player here would, for example, have 5 points. They would take the secondary big cube that comes with it, mark that, and then they would count up the number of cubes that are left on the board. These were their failed investments, and they'll track that as well using the small cube. So they would have 1 bad investment, 5 good investments, whereas, for example, the blue player has 2 good investments and 2 bad investments. And that would be the end of a round. The game's going to be played over 3 rounds, and you'll just clear off the board, reset every player to 1 big cube, 3 small cubes, so just like this they had at the start of the game. And then you'll play again, and essentially you'll play a total of 3 rounds. And then at the end of the game, whoever has the most big best good investments, which is whoever's big cube is furthest along, will be the winner. In the case of a tie, the player with the fewest number of bad investments would be the winner. And that is how you play Northern Pacific. All right, so that is Northern Pacific. And so, it's no surprise to say that I really enjoy this game. I included it on my best of list last year. I just happened to look on Board Game Geek, though, and see that there really wasn't a proper overview for the game, so I wanted to put one out there so more people could find out about what I feel like is one of the best filler games to come out in recent memory. This is, like I said, it is a republishing of a game from a few years back, but they did change one rule, which is essentially to play over 3 rounds. And that really opens up the game's dynamics, I feel. Because of it relying on shared incentives with such simple actions possible on your turn. The very first time you play this, the first round, you're going to be really constrained, or your turns are going to be somewhat determined by the turn order, and you're going to be looking at who's ahead of you and who's after you in turn order, and you're going to be trying to assume that they're rational actors and predicting what their moves are going to be. So, if you see that the player after you could place a train that would harm you, you'll have to place that train just to prevent them from taking that move, for example. Or if you see that they're probably going to place a train, you might want to put a cube in the city where they're going to be connecting to, so that you could benefit off of that action. So those are very simple predictive moves that you're going to be making on your first turn. But because of the way that the scoring works, that you're going to score up each round and essentially do a hard reset back to the initial game state beyond your score, you're going to have, after that first round, a leader emerge, and then all of a sudden you're not necessarily as concerned with what the players before and after you are doing as how could you keep the person who has the most points from extending their lead. And all players are going to have that shared incentive with you then to stop the leader. So because of that, and because this happens in such a tight 3-round structure, with each round lasting maybe 10 minutes or so, you're going to be really shifting your alliances. So like if you have a lot of cubes with shared with another player in a city, you'll want to connect to that city, but then maybe the next city that you're invested in down the line, you have different players with, so you'll have a different strategy with trying to get to that city, essentially. So the way that this game really intensifies that whole shifting alliance aspect, which is popular in a lot of games that have stock market simulations built into them, is really interesting. So what this does do is it distills down what a lot of heavier train games, so like your Steams and your Age of Steams and your 18xx games and so on. Those games are all about, you know, having these, you know, shared incentive structures built into them. Here it's really just almost boiled down to its essence, and it really intensifies that playing other players in a highly interactive manner. That really makes this a strongly appealing game to me. Now that means that a lot of players who might have been who might be more accustomed to maybe like contemporary Euro games, which are more multiplayer solitaire, this may not appeal to all of those players. This is definitely an interactive game. It's definitely a game where you're going to have to make cutthroat moves in your own interest. So, you know, I think that does mean that you'll want to, you know, try the game before you buy it. But at the same time, because it's played over, you know, those 3 rounds with the same 3 players, or the same number of players over the 3 rounds, past performance is also going to factor into players' decisions. So, you know, if you cut somebody off from a city where they might have had, you know, 2 cubes in, they'll probably remember that down the line over the next few rounds. So, you know, those shifting alliances are really like that, and, you know, the psychological or social element of this game is really where it lives and breathes and where it comes alive. At its core, it's so simple, it almost bears comparison to something like, you know, Transamerica, which is a popular train game that has a really simple rule set where players are building a shared network. But in that game, players have hidden information, so you don't really know if you're helping or hurting other players. Here, you absolutely know who you're cutting off when you make the train go past the city, and you could see how many cubes each player has in front of them and what their score is, so you know who you have to hobble to come out ahead yourself. So, you know, it's definitely an interactive game. I wouldn't say that's a particularly mean game, but it's a game that, you know, you're going to be, you know, making enemies, you know, very temporarily and making friends very temporarily. So it's one that I greatly enjoy, one that I felt should get a little bit more attention, so that's why I created this video, and one that I would encourage you to, at the very least, try sometime, even if you decide that it's not for you. So those are my thoughts on Northern Pacific, and thank you for watching.